I want to welcome. Are we ready up there? What did I just sit on? Oh. I want to welcome you all to Fire in the Library again. And my name is Eugenia Butler, and this is an ongoing series of improvisational conversations, many times cross-disciplinary, and you, the audience, is an extraordinarily important part of what we're doing. One of the things that excites me as much as the marvelous conversations is that more and more this is a really enlightened, large-scale conversation of talking about exciting and important issues. So I thank you all for being here. You're all incredibly important to this strange experimental sort of endeavor. Tonight we have, we're going to be talking about color, and we have three, as I put out on the flyer, three divas of design. All extraordinary.
One goddess.
What's that? One goddess. Okay, right. And we're very, very lucky to have them with us tonight. We have Geri Kavanagh, Tina Beebe, and Deborah Sussman. And I think that there's so much to say about each one of them. I very briefly, I actually met Geri when I was about 16 years old in a party in the middle of my...
Under a sheet.
What? No, you weren't under a sheet.
No, there were a lot of people under sheets that night.
Really? Oh, then that was the James Lee Byers thing.
Yeah.
But there was another thing before that.
Oh, really?
Which is, I remember you and Frank Gehry standing in the middle of my parents' living room in a big party.
Yeah.
And you were the only, you were the most interesting grown-ups in the place to me. And Tina, I've never met before. Tina has worked with Charles Moore, and is an architectural colorist. Deborah and I go back a very long way. I know you and Paul did my father's offices in the 70s, didn't you? Yes, yes. And Deborah is also all of these women have worked with color in magnificent ways. I thought that it might be interesting to start off and look at some images. Since this is about color, it might be really nice to ground ourselves with some real color. But I thought I would, first of all, I found this wonderful quote today from Alexander Thoreau's book on the primary colors. And he said, was Socrates correct in Plato's Theaetetus when he asserted that what we call a color is neither the active nor the passive element, the seeing or the seen, but something which, passing between them, is peculiar to each percipient. And then, if we are never the same, are therefore colors? Is all process, as Whitehead put it? That would be a very nice thing to start off the thought process with. So why don't we look at some images? And you can, Deborah, you would like to talk. I think I put yours in first. So would you like to talk as we go along about what we're seeing on the screen? Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Maybe I'll turn this off while we're...
That's a good idea. I just have a weird problem with my back to the audience. I really do.
Well, would you like to switch? Would you like to...
No, well, I was, maybe we can do it after, but I was thinking maybe if we just, three of us could sit there after the slides.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start. Are we on?
The lights.
Oh, thank you. Power is on. Okay. And the fact that I'm running this means it may explode. Okay. That just did. Okay, right. Reverse. Okay, Deborah.
You know, did you think we should turn the lights off in the stacks? Because they're sort of blinding.
They're well, let's see.
It's hard to see what's on the screen.
Aaron, can you see if you can... Why don't you start telling us what's here?
Well, what I just brought, I mean, it would have been much faster for me to gather 100 slides than 10. but because color is such a fluid story. But I decided to bring a few images that describe some different ways in which I and we as turn it
better. One more. The one closest to us is the one there.
Yeah,
perfect. Thank you.
Now this seems to be a bit out of focus. I don't know if I can get it in focus, but anyway, this is a project that was recently completed in Newark. Yeah, well, that's because I have my back to you, so the books can hear me very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this around like this right now. Now my back's to Tina, so it's not a perfect world. Not a perfect world.
Why don't you stand over here, Deborah, while we're doing the slides, and that way everybody can hear you, and you'll be comfortable too.
Anyway, this is a very imperfect slide, but one of the ways in which we work with color has to do with, it's very involved with architecture in the built environment, but it's also involved with a story and history and context. Now, this happens to be one of the inspirations for some of the work that was done at the New Jersey Center for the Performing Arts, which opened in October. Barton Myers was the architect, and we worked on this project for about 5 years. It's in Newark. And Newark has a population that is basically African American. And in certain respects, the project was infused with a number of considerations. One being that it is a center for the performing arts. Another that it is in a city which is a very old city, which was a very important port at one point, which informed many aspects of the architecture. And the other was the community, the immediate community that it services, which is basically African American. So we looked at a lot of African stuff, which has to do with fabrics that are worn in many ways on bodies, and a certain language which was also not just in fabrics but in iconography. And when looking at that, both the information of what we found in the African culture plus the brickwork and the language, the architectonic language of Newark and the surrounding area informed things like the patterning in the atrium here and the floor patterning to the right, which you now see executed in terrazzo. And I'm using this project as an example of some of the work that is done in concert with architecture and how the notion of color and material and context and graphic archaeology weaves its way into the built project. This is a piece of a very large runner, that will be 100 feet long and is being woven as we speak in Thailand, informed by the fabric that I showed you in the very beginning. Now I'm switching to something very different, and I guess it's hard to focus, but anyway, this is an out of focus example of something that was photographed by either Paul or myself after we did the creative design work in the Olympics. And what these are painted lilies in Mexico. And if you look at the color, that color had been one of the most important influences on the Olympics. This was done before we took that photograph, but there were a lot of other images from Latin America and being on the Pacific Rim that informed and were the reason why the Olympics in '84 looked the way it looked. This is something, again, that's different, and it was anyway, this is a photograph in Horton Plaza, which some of you may know. And Horton Plaza is a very haptic piece of work, very complicated and somewhat confusing.
When you say haptic, what do you mean?
Well, there were finally no construction drawings in the traditional sense. It was done in a very lateral thinking kind of way, in a very intuitive way and very unusual way. It was impossible, really, when it was built, to understand it fully and design the color. And it was also painted in a way from left to right under scaffolding. So the color work was done, and this is the early 80s, kind of blind. And now that it is the late 90s, we have a chance to revisit that, and we're recoloring it but with a little more discipline and in a way that is more conceptual than it was in the beginning. And there's a story that I've woven around this, which has to do with imagining Horton Plaza as a real place, as a village, which was settled by certain people whose grandchildren, who came from Europe and Mexico, and they were the antecedents of the people that are there now, redoing it, and we are redoing the color as we speak. And these communities that I made up, who are from Italy and Rome, and having brought with them their redness, are also living in a good neighborly way with the Milanese and the Scandinavians, who brought their yellowness with them. And in the back are the Dutch who intermarried the Mexicans, saying we need to demark our lines of communication, and particularly our elevator towers, in such a way that they become landmarks. So that's another way in which we work with color, and another way is as iconography. And when we did the new image for the city of Santa Monica, which includes this logo, we looked at qualities that were inherent in Santa Monica and will never change, which include the curve of the bay, the line of the Santa Monica Mountains, and the setting sun over both, which have been, for many, many years, looked at by many generations of people as that which will never change in Santa Monica. So the color iconography has to do with the fact, with those facts. And these colors, the yellow, the green, the orange, and the blue, are interchangeable in different ways, and this is the way they read out in the signs. And then this is something that's under construction right now in Culver City, which is a new streetscape on East Washington Boulevard, approximately from National Boulevard to La Cienega. And the reason I'm showing this slide is that there are many components of this streetscape. These are towers that celebrate Ballona Creek, which if you drive along East Washington Boulevard, you don't even know it's there. And there'll be temporary banners on these structures, and they are part of a series of things that go along the street in response to a very, very long 5-year involvement with the community as to what the community felt it wanted and needed, and what the CRA was going to give them. And so color is a part of the story, and it was a very difficult color assignment to do. So that's the last of my 10 slides, and I just wanted to share with you some of the ways in which we deal with color.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tina, you're next. Do you want to,
Can I sit here?
absolutely. Just remember that to project, because we don't have this mic, so
Okay, well, if you can't hear me, then shout.
let her know. Yeah.
This is a very loose collection of slides in, as I see, no particular order, of some work that I've been doing recently, along with Buzz's Moore Rubel Udell, my husband's office, and a number of other architects. And it just shows some different ways of thinking about color and reasons for choices that come along. This is what used to be a large warehouse building in Tacoma, and it's been converted recently to the new University of Washington at Tacoma. And they had very little money to do anything, but they had these fabulous old buildings with big timbers. And so what we did basically was use paint and punch out holes in floors and make new stairways, and tarred it up, put in skylights. And it was a really inexpensive way of getting quite a lot out of these magnificent old buildings. We saved the buildings, and we wanted to just use really tough industrial materials and strong colors, not very much, most of it's white, but there are a series of colors which sort of mark certain atrium spaces in certain skylit areas so that they become sort of orientation points.
Was there reasons for choosing these particular colors? I mean, was it an intuitive, what kind of a process took you to these colors?
Well, I chose the red because I wanted it to sort of be reminiscent of Corten steel, to be tough and to be industrial.
Reminiscent of Corten steel.
Of primer, the red steel primer that they use. And the blue, this is in Tacoma, remember, where it rains 300 days out of the year. So the blue, there's a skylight there, and the blue was to sort of remind them of the days when it is sunny and there is blue sky. There were things like that, but there's no great overriding theory. I mean, I had a really difficult time with the committee on this building because they were about as contentious a group as I've met, and they announced they didn't like any of the colors. And they didn't want, I said, well, explain to me what it is you don't like about them. And they said, well, they're pastel colors, and we don't want pastels. And I said, so this two sort of troublemaker woman. And I said, well, they're not exactly pastel. Yes, they are, they said. So actually, that was the sort of nature of the media.
Can't hear you.
So basically what happened was I said, well, can you point to some colors that you like better than others among these that are less pastel? And they didn't like any of them. They wouldn't have any of them. So what they basically wanted was mauve and yellow. And we ended up with the university people sort of stepping in and saying, we're going to do what the architects tell us to do. And so these very angry women dropped into the background, and now that it's done, they think it's wonderful.
Wonderful. Good.
Which is
Good.
which
Yeah.
is what happens a lot. Then people think it's going to be one thing, and when it's done, including myself sometimes, when it's done, it's something else altogether. This is a house. These are all in odd order, but I confess.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
These are all in very strange order, but I confess to having assembled them in about 3 minutes.
Maybe was it what, just at the slide time, can I move you back here so maybe you can project a little bit? Thank you. And it was sort of getting out of conversation format into lecture format, but I want to...
Yeah, I didn't think this was a lecture.
What's that?
I didn't think this was a lecture. That's
Well,
a house in the Palisades, which was supposed to come after this slide, which is the garden in the front of the house, which is, I've become really interested in landscape in the last few years because I've always loved gardens, but also because of the incredible richness of colors that you can get in plants. And it seemed to me a natural evolution to go from the color of buildings to the color of the landscape palette. And the interesting thing to me has been going back and forth between the two. That for me, the color of the plants have influenced the color of the building, and the color of the building has influenced which plants I would choose. For example, that is a arbutus with a particularly red bark, which I liked against the sort of ochre color of the walls. And I also like the idea of combining this sort of strangely lime yellow-green plant with the blue-gray green plant and with the big agaves, which are also blue-gray. So that, for me, has been a really interesting way of enriching the choice of colors and the connections between colors and the applications to them. I guess all these slides are in backwards, actually.
Are they?
Yeah, that's right. That is a rendering for the American Embassy in Berlin, which is a competition that we theoretically won about 4 years ago, which I don't know if they're going to build it or not. They say they're going to build it, but it's an amazing site that the government owns right next to the Brandenburg Gate. And it's a situation where we had to work very carefully with, on the right-hand side, which in the real situation is on the left-hand side, is the Brandenburg Gate, which is in the absolute center of Berlin. And it's a kind of a ochre limestone color, so it was very important that we take the historical context of the gate into the consideration of what the colors of the building were. But at the same time, it's also supposed to be American and feel American, and establish the presence of the American government there, so that on the side next to the Brandenburg Gate, which was the first slide, it's very ochre-y and kind of gray-green, similar to a lot of Berlin. And then at the back side, there actually is a little bit of red, white, and blue subtly woven into that, because that's the consulate end of it, where most people will arrive at the building. This is a project in Sweden, which is a big housing project. And it's under construction now. They're doing a series of villas, which is what you're looking straight ahead at. There's there's a model shot. I'll go, yeah, there's the model shot. That's the whole, well, that's only part of it, really. But there are a series, there's a large crescent-shaped building and then another S-shaped building, which is called the Snake. And they're kind of punctuated by about 8 of these villas, which they're all high-end apartments. And the villas, I think, have about 12 apartments each. And the idea was to make the bigger buildings out of local brick, carefully chosen to be sort of familiar and recognizable to the Swedes. But the wonderful thing about Sweden is that it's gray and it's dull and it's dark. And so they love having very intense colors on their buildings. It's quite normal to them. I mean, if I proposed this in a lot of places, people would think you were out of your mind.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would be able to get away from this, like in an American city, for instance.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, because it's wonderful.
But so that you get these 2 buildings on either side are brick. And then there's zinc roofs, and we wanted to use the color of the zinc roofs coming down into the buildings. But in the background, you see one of the villas, which is actually an even more intense version of that yellow. And right now, we're in the process of building 3 more villas, one of which is going to be very bright blue, and another which is a sort of a saturated but kind of earthy green. And then there's another one that's a really intense salmon color. And it's quite fun because the Swedes think they're great. They love them. And they're not sort of threatened or intimidated by them at all because they see it as sort of a welcoming home. These are all backwards. That's just a shot of part of the MRY office, which we moved into about, I don't know, five or 6 years ago, and we remodeled it. But we just put we remodeled the building actually fairly extensively, but we put a few strong colors, usually at the end of an axis, often where it had natural light from a skylight falling on it. So that most of the space is actually white, but then there are a few bright colors that punctuate the vistas.
Now, again, let me ask you something. Now, and one of the things that I've learned just in talking to you already is that there's this kind of really interesting intuitive process that you go through. It seems to me anyway, what were the reasons for choosing these particular colors? What were your decisions about?
Well, basically, I took the floor plan of the building, and I took a lot of colors that I liked. And I had little squares, and I moved them around. And I knew which walls had skylights. And I knew that I wanted colors that would sort of reinforce the idea that there was a skylight, and so it was natural light. For example, the wall at the end has a lot more light on it than the dark blue wall in the foreground. So instead of working against that, I was trying to reinforce that. So there were a lot of decisions like that, but there also was a sense of sort of, the combination of the sort of purpley blue and the yellow at the far end is not an accidental thing. Those are complementary, relatively sort of complementary. They're not directly complementary, but they are kind of complementary.
So there's sort of like an intuitive decision-making process backed up by a certain amount of real clear planning and thinking and conceptualizing.
Then also, again in the garden, I did these very deep red walls, which I didn't have a good slide of there are also some blue walls out there, but I liked the idea of combining the sort of blue agave cactus and then the purple lavender with the color on the wall. It's just something that I'm intrigued by. This is also backwards. That's Buzzes in My House, which we built it's almost 10 years ago now. And the thing about this house was we've been using a lot of colors on all of our buildings for a pretty long time. And then we decided that we wanted to just use the color of materials in our house, so that the wood is that's just the color of fir. But the spruce decking has a little bit of stain on it, but the plaster is just white plaster. It has some burnt umber ground into it with it, and then the stone is that's just the color of the limestone. So we wanted to really have this incredibly simple in a sense pure, and it's just a different kind of palette where all of the colors came from the natural materials. Instead of paint, there's actually almost no paint in the house.
So does that feel different to you? Is that
It does.
it does? What's the difference in the feel? As opposed to living in, like being in the office maybe would be?
Well, there's a very different sense of a color coming from within a material than there is from the painted surface lying on top of it. That it reflects light in a different way. I mean, typically something like wood or stone or even integral plaster has a lot of colors in it which are reflecting light and giving you a kind of a richness which you almost never get from a single layer of paint. Just because it's a complex. Deborah and I both worked for Ray Eames, and one of the many charming things about Ray was that she went around with a little magnifying glass around her neck.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she'd say, "Look!" And she'd hold her magnifying glass out, and she'd hold it up for you to look through the magnifying glass at some wonderful flower or color of paper or something. And you'd see all this incredible intensity of color and richness of texture and stuff, which was, in a way, what you get from a natural material that you don't get from paint. You get this wonderful combination of complementary and different kinds of color, which it's very hard. You can't really duplicate it in paint. Not even Zolotone. You can try. Oh, this is a project which is probably the hardest project I've ever worked on. In Germany, in a little tiny town called Karo. And it was in the east, and it's in East Berlin, and it was redeveloped in the last 6 years by the German government with private developers to build affordable housing for the East Germans. And this was a situation where MRY, my husband's office, won a competition to do the planning. They did all the planning. This is all new infrastructure. The sort of the colored-in part is all new construction, and it was built amongst fields and farms and sort of falling down buildings. And there was a little town which you can see along in the top right. That's the existing town of Karo. But the really difficult thing about this job was there were, I think, 50 different German architects working on the different buildings in this. And one city planner named Stimmann, who was the head planner in Berlin for about 5 years, and was a very powerful guy. And Stimmann decreed that all of these 50 architects would have to adhere to our color guidelines. Well, this did not go over well in Germany. I mean, the Germans wanted to choose their own color, which was gray. Or white. And it was an uphill battle because we were trying to use colors that were there already, that were existing in the farms and in the countryside, and also to warm it up some because it's gray most of the year. And unlike the Swedes or the Scandinavians, the Germans tend to like gray colors, and they're kind of threatened by stronger colors. Because when an architect does use a strong color, they tend to go straight to Kelly green or school bus yellow or something, and then everybody hates it, and so they all back off. So there's this kind of, I think Berlin now especially is getting much better. But I had to establish a set of guidelines and rules for different neighborhoods and different types of housing, and what established palettes of colors that each of these could be, and then meet with the architects and talk about how they could use these colors. And I had Stimmann on the one end sort of beating me over the head saying, they must. And the architects on the other side saying, but all my buildings are white. I never put color. So it was quite fascinating and quite challenging. And it's being built now. I haven't been there in at least a year, but it's just, the fascinating thing for me was the difference in working at this scale and working in the scale of sort of moving plants around next to a building, which I kind of prefer.
Where did you find the decision making come for this plan? I mean, with all of these pressures on you, you would have to come from a very deep place, it would seem to me, to be able to.
We had a series of meetings with different city planners and architectural historians and different architects Berlin architects about the context, the historical context. There's precedent for colored buildings in Potsdam, which we liked a lot, and we wanted to integrate that idea, which had been influenced, I think, by southern Italy and Rome. And so there was a lot of precedent for that, but it was a matter of deciding, you know, are most of the housing units white, and then the important places are bright colors, or are the housing units bright colors and the important... Also, there is a certain, I don't want to get into all the planning.
Sure.
There's a very specified route for pedestrian traffic and buses and various ways of getting through this site, which there's something called the Hauptraum, excuse me if there are Germans in the audience because my pronunciation is wrong, Hauptraumfolge, which is translates roughly as the main axis through town, which Dimon wanted absolutely to be emphasized. And so we, after a lot of back and forth, took the route that in order to call attention to this and to say this is the downtown part of this, it was off-white or white. And then as you got farther from the center of the town into the sort of lower scale buildings that were more like the farm buildings in the surrounding country, the colors got deeper and richer. But the main axis was pretty much whites and off-whites with some very primary color accents. And then it got more and more earthy as it went out from that. And tall buildings were meant to be lighter colors and smaller buildings could be more intense colors. Just because an intense color on a 4-story, 5-story building, which was the maximum here, is a lot. So we had accent parts of bigger buildings, but the whole building, depending on its size and its neighborhood, would fall into a category. And I tried to give them a lot of choice. I really did. The amazing thing was I gave them this huge range of colors, and they complained bitterly about not enough colors. So we added more colors still, and they all chose the same color, which was cold gray. So that's what was hard about it.
Okay.
Some of them really did. Oh, here, Jerry.
This must be Jerry. Okay. Here, Jerry, let me get through here. Now, I just chose 10 slides, Jerry, so...
We have a Huckler and sequence. If not, there's going to be...
Well, you'll just have to go with it. Let's see what you will. Yeah, thank you.
I decided to go in a different direction because I have quite a library of color that I have collected in my office over the years. And I knew that this would be a lecture for a lot of students, and I wanted the students to know, how do we get to where we do with color? It just doesn't come snap out of the air. It comes from an awful lot of looking, and the awful lot of looking is in comparison to me of like learning to play the piano or learning how to dance. And you have to learn how to dance and sing in color just as anything else. And I think that is very important. And I'm always carrying a camera around, or I'm carrying a shovel around with plastic bags. And this happened to be in the edge of my neighborhood, some color that I saw that was just absolutely delicious. This was in Korea, a temple, a ceiling. And again, it's part of my collection. This is in England, a roundabout. And this was vegetation, and it was in the winter of the year because of the cabbages, although you will find this same kind of thing in Japan and also in Korea because of the climate at that particular time of the year. This is a tobacco barn in the Carolinas, and I love gray back east and hate it out here. Gray back east has really a sparkle and a liveliness, and I think it's because of the moisture, and we don't have the same kind of moisture here. We have it in certain times of the year, but most of the time it kind of gets burnt out. And also gray has become so much of kind of a cliche with the so-called Bauhaus movement, and a lot of people don't really realize how the Bauhaus movement got to where it was in the certain kind of color that it is, and this all ties into my color library. This was on a recent trip down to Mexico. I wish the slide were better, but it was some of the most delicious color I have seen in a long time. This is in a village just south of Oaxaca. And it was the kind of combination of color that I just love to be able to use.
What
myself.
made it delicious to you? Can you bring
Yeah,
us?
one is that it's faded. It was an unusual kind of combination. This kind of pink, this kind of khaki green. There's also a deep, heavier pink that lines the doors. And then this on the left was the natural gray stucco with a sign on it that also had some green in it. It was the kind of, combined with the blue skies. I just loved it. And it was a kind of combination that I had not seen in a long time. And I had not seen this in Mexico. And you can hardly go wrong in Mexico in photographing because the color is so delicious. This is a church that's down the street that is being restored. And again, the color combinations and the quality of restoration was one of the best restorations that I have seen anywhere in the world. To the left was the museum, and I could not photograph inside because the guards wouldn't let me, but it was one of the best restorations I have seen anywhere in the world.
What made it the best, Jerry?
It was very simple, the quality of the workmanship, the quality of the lighting, and the quality of how the paintings and the other accessories were placed in it was just absolutely first rate. I just came out of there like this. It was so terrific. And the sky could not have been a better sky. This is another color. Years ago, I took this in Kyoto of a Shinto temple, and the combinations of these kinds of colors, and you'll see later on, I think in a couple of the slides, I love color. I think I could just eat color. It's just delicious to me. This is the Neutrogena Corporation, which we did the corporate headquarters. This is the research building. We also did their offices in Paris and London. There's a total of 72 colors, including materials on the floor, tile, carpet, fixtures, bathrooms, and everything else, and I was allowed to use color to my heart's content, just wildly. The funny thing about it was that when the colors were going up and none of the art pieces were up, I could not walk across the floor without daggers, bullets, and people screaming at me.
Why was that?
Because they said, why did you use that color? Why is that? I hate that kind of color. It was continually. So when it came to installing the artwork, which is an extensive folk art collection, which is now being housed in the International Folk Museum in Santa Fe. When that began to be applied, and we had to do that at night because people were disturbing us too much. But when they began to see why these colors were placed there and why the folk art and textile collection was placed there, then they began to see why. And then people began to come up to me and say, oh, now I understand why you did that. I had no idea why you wanted to do that. And but that was the risk I took, and it was also the risk that the client took, because he gave me carte blanche to do the whole job. He looked at it once, and that was it.
So what was going on those walls? The artwork was very crucial. Was a very deep.
I knew eventually what the artwork was going to be. We could not put the artwork on the walls until we got the certificate of occupancy. And after we got the certificate of occupancy, we then placed it. The reason being, if we had placed these on the wall before the certificate of occupancy, they would have been then declared a museum. They would have had to have different hours. They would have had to have different facilities for restrooms, although everything was handicapped. There was a whole bunch of things that related to that. But after we got that, we could do anything that we wanted. And the nicest thing of all for me was one day the client asked me into his office and he gave me a letter, and it was one of the largest brokerage firms in this country. And the brokerage firm said, I am so impressed with this building, I'm going to have my clients invest in your product.
Wow.
That also happened to this one. I'll go on to this is the Jazz Bakery in Culver City here. And this was a lot of fun because what I did on this was I took Matisse's book, Jazz, the original silk screen book that a friend of mine had, took it to the company, which I call the boutique of the paint company, and had them match all the colors of Matisse from that book. Now, Matisse's original book that he did were cut out pieces of paper that he painted the colors on the paper. They were not found pieces of paper. They were paper that he developed the colors for, and then they were printed. Most of the original book, I think, was silk screen. So we did this, and this has become a very popular place in town, and the colors are all Matisse jazz. Sorry, this is backward. This is the Richard Nixon Library, and we did the whole interior on this, including space planning, the architecture, everything. Now, what we did on this, which doesn't come across too well, but we did most of all the things green, because this was a subterranean room, a very, very large room. There was only one door of light, a light shaft coming down at the lobby entrance. And I kept thinking all the time, this would be really miserable if it were just an all-white place or a beige place. The architects really strung me out over the coals because they didn't like it. But the success of it was that the minute the people moved in, within 3 days, they said, oh, I feel so comfortable here with this green. It made them feel very, very comfortable.
And how did, excuse me, how did you choose the green? What was the choice of the green? Where did it come from?
The green came from several directions. These are 4 pitched ceilings. Richard Nixon was a Quaker, so we studied a lot on Quaker materials, and also the period of time that he grew up in California, plus the lighting fixtures were really based on craftsmen. We designed the lighting fixtures, some of the desks. The chair happens to be my own design of chair. It's called the Geri chair. So this all kind of ties into Richard Nixon's past, which was Quaker. And then on top of that, it was, the library is in a lemon grove. So all of this tied into that. And I felt like it was very, very successful. The rugs are very amusing because when he was vice president, he was allowed to receive gifts. And there's a room way, way over in the back that contained all the gifts that he received during when he was vice president. And some of these rugs here were gifts from different countries. So I said, why not, let's just use them in the interior.
Is that it? That's it. Okay.
Food, because there are some other things I really wanted to show the students in there, and that is how we arrive at color. And two of the slides were from a place called Ohio, Colorado, where I was on a vacation a couple of years ago and also did a project in Aspen. I collected with a friend of mine all of the wildflowers that were growing beside the road, and we dried them, and I took them back here to Los Angeles, and it took me about 2.5 months to match the colors from the dried flowers. And those are the flowers and the colors that I used in the house in Aspen. I was not allowed to photograph it because it's too complicated to go into. But I wanted to particularly show the students' process of how you arrive at certain things. It's not just for me, it's not just arriving at a lot of color chips. Color chips sort of drive me wild anyhow, because they're never really kind of true. Because I think 85% of them today are still printed instead of being applied. But there's only one company that I know in the United States that really has a sense of really doing good color, and it's a company out of Chicago, where that's the color that you get, what you see. And then the other thing is that little chips about this big, and I'm always having developers giving me a piece of paper about this big, about this wide, and has all these little chips on it, and they'll say, well, this is what the architect wants. And I'll say, too bad, because it's really a very limpy way to present something. And number two, I feel a lot of ways sorry for them, because most architects are not trained to even know what is a bad color or a good color, or what is good color combinations or not. And when we get into color, we get into big pieces and chunks, and sometimes even get at least maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, a piece of plywood or masonite and put the colors on them. And I'm sure Deborah and Tina have done the same thing. But I wanted to show them that process. And the other thing is that we get into a lot of color in product, which that's another kind of sort of like animal, but that animal ties into the bigger picture, and it all has to be cohesive and kind of go together, and it has to go together kind of in kind of philosophy. And a interesting fun thing happened to me about 8 years ago. I was invited by BMW and with 4 other colorists throughout the country for a meeting on what the future of BMW. The president of BMW, the man who was the head of design, and the man who was the head of engineering. It was one of these really highfalutin, high-powered conferences where they picked them up at the airport, flew them in a helicopter out to Orgura, and they arrived, and we started talking about color, and it was a delicious moment for me, but it only wound up 4 years later delicious. And the thing was, they said to me, what color would you come out with on a car? Well, at the time, there was so much in the air about nature and the environment. I said, oh, you should do a dark green forest green car. Well, if you could have heard the hysteria of the Germans, a dark green car? We've never been able to sell a dark green car. And they went on and on and on and on and on about it. And they even wrote memos back and forth about it. Guess what the first color of car that they manufactured in North Carolina was?
Dark green.
Dark green car. So it also takes a timing when you can put something out. And generally, people like us are really always ahead of our time. We're always on the edge of pushing. And so there is this bit of you have to sell it and you push it, and then usually they will finally come around. We all have horror stories of it, but it's...
I mean, that's one of the things that I noticed in our sort of early conversation that we had, is that you all had stories about high emotionality, that you get extraordinarily... You want to sit down, or you're...
I'm fine. I'll get down.
Okay. That it's a very emotional issue for everybody, and that's one of the things that I seem to be hearing from all of you. That you not only do you have to be that there's this very practiced, intuitive kind of this practice that you've developed, but that also you're working in an area which is highly emotional for human beings and really primitive, it seems to me.
Well, you mean the activity of doing color is emotional?
No, I mean that the human being's reaction to color is very emotional.
It's not logical, the reaction.
It's often not visual.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well,
I understand that.
You really you take everything you've done in your life and bring it to everything you do. And so in designing color or working with color, you have reasons, but they're not linear reasons, they're sort of lateral reasons. They're everything that's in you. And so you select colors and you make colors and so forth, and then someone could come along and say, I don't want that color. You can't use it. My mother had a living room that color, and I always hated that room, and it has nothing to do with the way a color looks. Whereas on the other hand, most people like blue. Blue is definitely a safe color, and it is a holy color. And I brought something along that maybe some of you are familiar with, but anyway, it's a study that was reviewed in the New York Times a little while ago. And it has to do with these 2 Russian guys that did a survey in the United States asking for people's favorite colors. And here's a chart with the results of everybody's favorite colors in the United States. And guess what the biggest is? It's blue. Blue is mom, it's apple pie, it's the American flag, it's soothing, it's okay, and that's everybody's favorite color. And so the rest of all the colors in this diagram, green is the second, and red is the third, and so on and so on. And I can't tell you how many times clients have asked come to me and they wanted to be blue. And in fact, when we did the Olympics, everybody was shocked that it wasn't going to be red, white, and blue. And when we were doing a color program, I'm going to move over there because, before I get crazy with my back to people, that we came up with, as a major color, purple. And I didn't show that because I only had 10 slides, but anyway, the colors we chose for Disney were based on Disney. They were based on the colors of Mickey. Black and white and red and yellow. And to that we had purple. And then in one of the presentations, one of the early presentations that we had, explaining why we added purple to the system, which was a wayfinding signing system and an iconographic system, that the purple was that which would pull the whole thing together, because red and black and white and yellow were also common to many other entities. And it was a color that now could be proprietary to Disney. And there was a presentation that we did with Michael Eisner, and Jeff Kassenberg was there. Kassenberg said, "But why can't it be blue?"
Deborah, should we move your chair over there? Will you be more comfortable over there? Yeah, well, here's more. Maybe we can switch this over here.
So anyway, I forgot what the point was, if I really answered that point.
Isn't color choice ethnically driven?
Not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily, no.
What do you mean by
it's
that?
prejudice.
When I taught kindergarten, I made strips of paper or whatever with the craft was, and I was utterly shocked that the dominant choice in that kindergarten class, which was dominant Latino and a few black, dominant choice was black, and I never expected that out of kindergarten. And I figured that the black was an ethnic.
When was it? How long ago?
4 years ago.
I think that it's really hard. There are these various psychologists who talk about how blue makes people calm, red makes people excited, yellow, I've forgotten what yellow is supposed to do for you. Happy, yes. Except, as far as I'm concerned, it's extremely bogus to make generalizations like that, because so much of it depends on the scale, the quality of the color, the quality of the light, the texture, the surface. I mean, if it's a yellow flower, it's one thing. If it's 40 stories of yellow, it's another. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, it may have been that the black was the most interesting piece of paper, or one kid in the class might have chosen it and the others chose it because
he
top
chose
dog
it or she chose it, yeah.
Or that black is used tremendously in sports in the last few years.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
it's become a very hot color.
Yeah.
And actually started out as being a very macho color in sports.
I
Maybe.
find that interesting. Our grandchildren, the boys like all black, and they are young, and it's really astonished me that they pick black. The girls pick more color,
Yeah.
brighter color.
Well,
But I think people are they make decisions based on, a lot of times, we're talking about corporate, a lot of times based on things which have nothing to do with what the building would be like that color. It has to do with what Deborah was saying, you know, their mother had a living room that color, or they once had a necktie that color and they hated it. I had a client once who I had to choose a color for a wall that was going to be behind a very famous David Hockney painting, and you all know what his colors are like, but she wanted color. And I finally settled on this color, which was kind of what I called oogie green, which was, it had a gold frame. And this was interesting with the gold frame, and I figured that would be good because it had a lot of intense green and intense red. And she looked at it and she said, "I couldn't possibly have this color in my house." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I had," I don't know what she had, oh, jaundice, and I was that color for 6 months. I said, "You don't have to have that color." And who knows? I mean, you can't really categorize that kind of thing. And I had a client once who practically burst into tears. I mean, he was a grown man. He was actually a very tough, feisty lawyer, and I was proposing some innocent green stain for part of the wood on the outside of his house, and he said, he picked up the sample and he said, "Is this the color of those bamboo garden stakes?" I said, "Oh yes, that is the color." He said, "I hate that color. I hate that color. My father used to beat me with those stakes."
So there's this very.
You don't have to have that color.
And we have this very kind of associative.
Yes.
Associative, not visual.
Visual. It's really interesting that
phenomena.
you said that. You keep emphasizing that it's not visual. I find that very interesting.
And at least some people can say why. But there are many other people who say, I don't like it.
But then the other thing they'll do is if in fact you get the color up that they say they weren't going to like, many times they say, oh, I didn't think it was going to look like that.
I had that once happen on a house, and it was, at least I felt, a fabulous raspberry color, and the client looked at the prime coat and wrote in the wet paint, I hate this color. So it took her some time to do that, but happened to be her two sons were painting it, and I said, go ahead and paint it. She'll go to work and we'll forget all about it. And she came back that evening and saw the color, and she says, oh, I didn't know it was going to look like that. You know?
Yeah.
People have kind of reactions. I had a client, a very well-known lady in this town, I'll name nameless, and was doing work at the music center, and I happened to have a passion for Japanese lacquer red, and I wanted to do this table. And she looked at it and she says, it's bugs! It's bugs! It's bugs! Get it out of here!
Bugs?
It's bugs.
Bugs.
And I couldn't make this, what the association, but that was what her association was with it. So we didn't do the table.
Go ahead.
There are lots of preconceptions that come into it, and it's very hard to be able to tell in advance what it's going to be. I worked a long time ago for the Irvine Company and for another one called the Rancho Santa Margarita, and we were trying to get them to use color on the buildings, the builders, because they sell. And the builders all came in complaining bitterly, saying they could not possibly sell a house that wasn't white. That we were proposing these.
So is that where those decisions come from?
Another client of mine said, look what you've unleashed on Orange County. All this peach and yellow and terracotta, you've unleashed it. But the builders were really frightened that they were going to lose their shirt because they were not going to be able to sell a house that was anything but white. And it turned out that so they did a few, but those were the ones people wanted.
But a lot of it is because we really don't have training within our structure of how to use color or work with color or what color can do. We don't. And I was talking with somebody on the phone today, a very large finishing company, an international one, and we were talking about the missing link in working with color. And we have a big missing link, and that link is with the architect-developer community. They don't understand what we have been doing for so long and understanding. They don't understand how we got there, and there needs to be this education from the very beginning somehow.
I don't know if it's the architect and the developer. It seems to me it's the marketing people.
Well, the marketing people enter into that too. I had that with several clients, so they always have to have marketing proof. And I said, well, how can you have marketing proof when there are things in the air which we pick out all the time that we know that are happening, and they should trust us that what we're picking out of the air is what's going to happen, it should be.
Well, the marketing philosophy has to do with what is going to sell, and what is going to sell is what has already been selling.
Yeah.
And it's a self-perpetuating kind of thing, which evolves when somebody does take a risk and then a new thing happens, and then it gradually gets into the culture, and then the marketing people go along with that kind of thing.
So do you think that the colors that we're surrounded with at this point, that if we drove here tonight, the colors that we're mostly surrounded with are colors that are derived from choices 10 years ago or 5 years ago?
20 years, 30 years ago.
It depends where you are. It depends what you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at a mini mall, then it's probably colors that were developed in the early 80s. And I think Tina and I were both interested in certain palettes that I can't even look at now in certain ways because they've been so abused and exaggerated, made cartoons of. And it's this sort of the Me Too, which is not only true in color. I mean,
sure. But it's also, I mean, I was driving here tonight and I was, of course, thinking about this and thinking about all of you, and I realized that so much of the color in our environment as sort of ordinary human beings just are moving through the city is determined by other people. It's determined. There's very little that we actually determine in our environment that's color.
When you say we, who do you mean?
I mean, like myself. I mean, here I drove from East LA to SCI-Arc. You know, very aware of color. You know, there's natural color. There's this kind of layered color. But that really a lot of the colors that we're surrounded with in the everyday environment, in the urban environment, are colors that car companies have chosen, the color that this developer has chosen. I mean, we're surrounded with it was a very sort of strange sea of predetermined colors. We're not able to choose our color environment in the ways that you do in a very specific way. And I find that just very interesting. Very yeah.
I'm really curious, and your name is Geri, is it?
Yes.
That you seem to indicate that there was a learning and a system that developed with the use of colors. And I'm wondering if the three of you were to do the same project, would there be great similarities in what you did?
I don't know.
We don't know. There could be.
But if there is a
there could
system,
not be.
then one would assume.
No,
But it's not a system.
No. I did not use the word system.
Didn't you? Okay.
Okay, I didn't use it because I'm not a systems person
Yeah.
at all. What I was talking about is the way you get to color. I mean, very simply, how I got to color and liked color so much as a child, I used to play with my mother's spools of thread and stack them up in different kind of combinations. And then the next thing, which I brought with me, was that they put me in art school when I was 8 years old. And I got a muffin tin. And the muffin tin, I learned how to mix colors. And the brushes here too. And so this is a very natural way.
The original muffin tin?
Yes. Sure, Tina. It's a very natural when you learn, it's, as I said, like music or dance, you learn how to get to a certain color by mixing. It isn't just like, oh, I've got a color chip and that's it. When you learn how to mix a color to get to a certain color, and I've taught it where I've taken students and drawn a big circle, a 10-foot circle, and said, okay, I want you to come up with 20 different colors within your circle within 3 hours. And they all kind of go, at you. And then at the end of about maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours, then they begin to get into it, and then they begin to get interested in it. And by the time it's over, then they begin to understand the process, that it's not one as easy as you think, but also they begin to find out how much fun it is to get there and how you get there. And I think that's very, very important. I know I had experience on another way, which is fun, in Korea. And I was with a hand-woven silk factory. And the eye of the dyer was the most incredible experience I had, where I was able to take to the eye of the dyer ceramic. This is a piece of Korean ceramic. And say, I want you to mix me that color. I want you to mix me this color. I want you to mix me that color and that color. Now these are all shades. And usually within about 4 hours he could do it. He had an eye that could sort of like go in and dig out and separate, and knew in his head and eye how to get there. I didn't. But he knew how to do it in a chemistry way, which was fabulous. You were going to ask a question.
Yeah, I wondered how much you still use the color wheel, or are you all choosing your colors?
I've never used the color wheel.
Intuitively?
Maybe other
Never used it.
Never used it.
I never had used it, but I've just recently started fooling around with watercolor, which is quite fun. And Lee Buckley was teaching us, has been teaching us, and one of our first assignments was to make a color wheel. Well, oh, this is interesting. I've never made a color wheel. And guess what? It was pretty good. Now I think, now what would I do if I were doing this a split complement? And it's interesting. I mean, it's,
What did you learn from it? What caught your interest about
well,
it?
I mean, you do know what are complements. I mean, it's hard to get this far without knowing what are complements. But if you actually have a physical object, which is a color wheel, you can look directly across and see, oh, it's actually more green than I would have imagined, the exact complement. And then there are these other combinations which are triangular versions, things that happen on a color wheel, which are actually pretty interesting, which are much harder to imagine in your mind.
So it's like tuning. It's like a tuning fork in a sense. It's a way to intensify your understanding.
I think it is in a way.
If you go back now to your color choices and apply the color wheel, do you see?
Yes.
Did you
French wheel,
intuitively perhaps apply it, or?
I think I did to a certain extent, but I think I do now more, which has been interesting for me because it's not something that in any of the color classes, Albers never talks about the color wheel.
No.
But did you all take Albers classes? Did you?
Well, I didn't study with Albers, but I certainly, I mean, Albers has affected education forever. So that there are people who, you know, it carries on from person to person, so that there's, and in fact, I see a number of my students here, thank you all for coming, and we've done a lot of work with color in a very sort of intuitive and sort of informal way. And sometimes we do studies that are based on Albers studies. There's a kind of flexing of the muscles and learning how to use them.
I think Albers made tremendous leaps when he came out here to work at the Tamarind Workshop, because prior to that, his color studies were always oil paintings, and if you ever, you know, in a museum looking at them, you're always going like this because you couldn't quite get the right kind of light on. But then we began working at the Tamarind Workshop, and the colors were crisp and clean in relationship. They became something entirely different, and it was, for me, excitingly wonderful.
He
was also a poet, which I think was very interesting, the book of his poetry.
There's a whole industry of sort of categorizing colors and making very elaborate systems of light to dark and warm to cool, and making sort of mapping every color, which I'm sure you're all familiar with from the computer. I mean, if you've all worked on the computer with colors, you can control the three different, you know, the amount of black, the amount of hue, and the amount of intensity. Well, there is a very scientific organization to color, which I think a lot of people can go over enthusiastic about, which we maybe reacted against and sort of said, we don't want a system. You know, we want something organic, and we want something that's more improvisational, like jazz or like something.
Well, color is light too. I mean, it isn't. I don't think it can be categorized ultimately. I mean, it's a perceptual.
Well, you can make charts, all kinds of charts in different media, including digital, where you go from one point to another point. And we've done that in some of my classes. And those are things you sort of, it's like learning the alphabet in a way. I mean, you learn it somehow or other, you gather it, but then when you actually do color, you don't depend on that.
That becomes your backlog, your well to draw on.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to have a well to draw upon. And it's fun and exciting. That's one of the reasons why I think I collect as much information about color. Here's another thing which really relates to Deborah. I had found this book several years ago called The Boy Who Spoke Color. And a couple of weeks ago, Deborah and Paul and I were having dinner, and Paul and Deborah mentioned an article that her cousin had sent. It was called All the Letter Colors of the Rainbow, which was an article from the San Francisco paper, which it talks about Hockney, and Hockney knowing about sound through color. Well, and so this was very interesting to me. And so this is again one of these things in my library. So
well, that article was very interesting because it's about a woman who, ever since she was a child, associated every letter of the alphabet with a color. R is green and Y is orange.
Did she actually see the color? Or did she have synesthesia, or did she just imagine the color?
She saw it.
Okay,
and her father discovered this. He never understood it. But then he discovered this in her, and he began to research on people who have that ability. And David Hockney is one. And as you know, there are certain musicians, Schoenberg has written, where they see sound as color. And it's a gift, it's a particular gift. Now, my cousin, who is now 91 years old, sent me this article, I guess hoping that I had that as well, and I've been trying to rack my brain to think of, did I ever see M as red? But I didn't. But, you know, when you talk about that kind of association, I'd like to read a little bit of another article that I picked up recently. It was in the New York Times a few weeks ago. They had a whole survey of New York over the decades in the 20th century, and each decade was written about by a different person. And if you're familiar with the work of Mary Gordon, anyway, she wrote, she's a marvelous writer, and wrote about, the seventh decade, 70s. So I thought I'd just read you a little passage from this because it's so lovely in terms of a perception of color. All eras have their colors, by which I mean their tonalities. The Victorian age is dove gray. The Renaissance is sunny gold. The 18th century a creamy white. Eras also have their time of day. The Middle Ages is early morning. 4th century Athens is brilliant noon. New York in the 60s was always summer, and the sun fell on the sidewalk through a net of light green leaves. But no, that isn't right. The tone was the black of a war cloud, the red of violence, the psychedelic oranges and yellows of drugged hallucinations. The time of day wasn't summer afternoon, the two words that Henry James said were the most beautiful in the English language. It was a freezing midnight. There was blood on the pavement. There were bullhorns and police whistles and the sound of sirens. And this story goes on, but I saved it because it describes a way of looking at the world and of experiencing life that I find the way I experience it very, very much. And I can remember colors and color combinations from when I was a small child that I can see in my work recur and recur and recur and recur. And then what happens sometimes is that I fight them. I don't want to use them again. I want to use colors I don't like. I want to make jarring juxtapositions, dissonance, you know, and I try and do that. But I mean, you know, I can do it in a certain way, and then the clients come in and they look at it, and sometimes gradually I can introduce that in certain ways. But anyway, I thought this triggered something in me, which I thought I wanted to share with you tonight.
Thank you, Deborah. Do you think that when do you one of the things that I hear you all saying is that there's this process that not only you have that you find colors that you really want to use, for instance, in a certain project, but then there's all of these levels of clients and marketing people and things that you were talking about. Are there things that you're envisioning now that I know, Tina, you talked about doing watercoloring now. You talked about doing this process of watercolors, which is really feeding your process. But are there things about color that are in your mind now that you're thinking about that you haven't been able to use? Is there a color of now that you're thinking about very perceptibly, very palpably?
Now, and there's a color of now which is really different. And let me give you the example. It was not Pershing Square, but the square downtown that Legoretto did.
Pershing
Square.
Yeah.
I hate the color on that. I hate it.
Yeah.
And it is not, you can use all those colors, purple and the magenta and the yellow and the blues, but they are not today's yellow, they're not today's purple, and they're not today's yellow. It's like 25 years ago, and to me, it's ghastly, and on top of that, it's dirty.
Well, I wish he were here.
I think it's something that's really important for today. It seems to me that I've been looking forward to it, and I haven't developed this, but the computer, I thought, is going to revolutionize the way, because you can program a building, I can't, but one can, into a computer, and you can push a few buttons and make it the color of your shawl. And bingo. And then you can say, okay, now make the window. I mean, it's amazing. The amount of time that you could theoretically save doing this. And finally, we got this program in the office called Lightscape. And so they'll program a building in, and I say, I don't have any more job. You guys can do it all. You know, you can sit there and just sort of click these colors, because it's amazing what it will do. And it'll give you the light conditions. It'll do things that, because one of the things that happens is you almost never get to choose a color in the light conditions that are going to actually be there in reality. So I thought, oh, well, the computer's going to say, this is what it'll look like at noon, and this is what it'll look like at twilight, and this is what it's going to look like in 40 stories. But it's very liberating in one sense, but it's also kind of a trap, because it's not at all the same thing as the real building.
And it seems also that the way you're all describing your processes and your choices are very enlivened by your life, by what you've learned. So how do you square up technology and this?
You could easily program that
Really?
in. Yeah.
Really? Aaron, you've got a question.
Yeah, how much do you, I know in architecture it's a big issue for myself, is when you design or when you work with color, there's always those issues that one brings forth that are part of themselves. And then there's always the contextual issues. And when you put together a project, how much of that do you really feel is related to the context and the environment that you're establishing, and how much is related to how you intuitively view color? Or you like we had the example of how certain people see color in certain situations. How much of that do you bring forth yourself, you as a person within your project versus the context?
Well, in my case, it's the actual process itself is very intuitive, but the context it's like the context is like this, and you're here with your intuition, and you're sort of navigating in the context in a very intuitive way. It's like Paul, my husband, who's here, always says that when the Olympics came around and I did the colors, I just opened up the paper drawer and I picked out all these colors, and that was that. Just like that. Well, it wasn't really just like that, but there was a lot that fed into that, because the idea was that, and I didn't talk about it very much with the slide, but Los Angeles is on the edge of the Pacific Rim. There are certain colors that are used in the Pacific Rim and in Mexico that you wouldn't use in Nagano or New York or, Finland. Although they use some of them in Finland, which they look good in the snow, but I wasn't quite sure why they didn't choose other colors. But anyway, those colors have been part of my life too, because I've lived much of my life in Los Angeles. So it was sort of all of those factors that made me open that drawer and know that magenta was going to work for a variety of reasons, both that kind of intuitive emotional thing, but also I knew because we had to cover 200 square miles with something that people could recognize and pick up like breadcrumbs, it had to be something that would stand out from daily life. And I knew magenta would do that. So it worked on a variety, on many levels.
So in that sense, she was trying to counterpoint the context in a way.
Can I ask you to speak up just a little bit?
I was just saying that in that sense, Deborah was counterpointing the context, which the idea was to make something recognizable in a morass of other colors. But I think the context always really is important. And because your work is one thing when it's on a model on your little base in the studio, but when it's a building out in the world and it's next to other buildings and it's in it's very different thing how it relates to the other buildings, and whether it has a conversation with them and with the street and with the culture as a whole or not. I found that the context varies radically according to the culture. For example, we did some buildings in Japan, and the Japanese, who have a rich tradition of using quite interesting, sort of earthy but rich greens and ochres and the kind of colors which are really difficult to get away with using here, but can be really beautiful. they were very timid about putting color on the outside of buildings. Everything had to be 14 shades of beige because it was very threatening somehow. Whereas you go to Scandinavia and they don't want beige, they want pink and yellow, and for them it's life to see intense color, and that's very important. So you have to take that as part of the context.
Yeah, and there's always this sort of dialogue between how much you're part of the context and how much you're not part of the context. To use an example that's not color at all, in the Louvre, when Pei did the pyramid, that was like such an extreme intervention that the Parisians were outraged, you know. Well, they were outraged when the Eiffel Tower was built. So that's one way of looking at it, which is juxtaposition. And another way of looking at it might be more analogous, where it's similar notes that are kind of close together on the musical scale.
But it's still a conscious relationship to the context, and whether you choose to do a juxtaposition or whether you choose to do a play with it, it still has to take it into account.
Have any of you ever had building codes that prevented you from applying colors that you chose?
Had what?
Yes, but not building codes, but
yes, not codes.
The bank. The bank.
Design review committees.
The bank.
I know what you mean by that. Yes. Okay.
The bank won't make the loan.
Won't make the loan.
That color on a house.
Wow, so that's why we live in a beige universe. Is the bank.
One of the reasons. One of the reasons. That's not the only reason.
That's really irritating. This was really irritating because it was a really boring beige development in. It was one of the first thing I worked on in I've forgotten, it was Pomona or one of those places, and it needed color, and we were just going to do some colors around the front door wall, some nice, and the bank would not allow the developer to do it because they thought some loan officer at the bank decided the houses wouldn't sell if they had that color on them.
I had that experience with the bank, one of my first. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But building codes, no, but strange situations like that. Or you get the board of directors' wife, president of the board of directors' wife, who
is a colorist,
is a decorator.
Without training.
She wants to do it, so you have to. I mean, there are weird, not building codes per se, but there are all these other codes of behavior that come in.
Oh, I suppose I'm just thinking right now. I know in Tucker Canyon there's some architectural
control. CC&Rs, yeah.
Right. So what if you were to? I don't know if there are color codes.
We did a project up in the Palisades Highlands, and the idea is it's supposed to be Mediterranean up there, all those houses. So they have, everything's pastel. Well, and the palette of plants is supposed to be Mediterranean, but they don't have Mediterranean plants. They have somebody's idea of Mediterranean plants, somebody's idea of what Mediterranean colors are, which happen to be 14 shades of peach sherbet, 14 shades of lemon sherbet, beige. And we did this house, which is, it's actually very similar to the color. When they plastered it, it looked almost identical to what it looked like when it was sheathed in plywood, which I thought was wonderful because it's kind of an Italian ochre. And the owners are in heaven. Well, the rest of the Palisades Highlands is beside themselves. They hate this so much because they don't think it's Italian. They don't think it's Mediterranean.
Somebody should give them a ticket to Italy.
I know.
Tuscany.
I know. So, but CC&Rs now, I think if you tried to build actually we have some friends who are architects who are trying to build a house in the Palisades Highlands after this house, and they said, thanks a lot, Buzz. We can't get away with a thing because you fooled them. You know, they don't like your house. This is the developer, the homeowners group, because this house doesn't meld in with all these other big sort of monstrous.
Well, let me tell you, then you can get involved with city councils. We're doing some work in a small city around Los Angeles. It's called Brea. We were called on by a very illuminated couple of people, really, in the city planning department. And they found me, and they asked me to help be their color consultant. And they were building a movie theater. That was going to be the first big thing on the Main Street as it was being developed. And there was a war between the client and the city.
and the war was about color. The movie
So
theater
it's
wanted
very
da-da-da-da-da, and the city wanted beige. And the war had gone on for some time, then I came into it, and somehow or other, the client loved me, and they said, yay, let's go ahead with this thing. So we did. But it had to be done overnight. And we really didn't have time to fully do what we normally do, which is you go out there and you make patches, and you look at them in the sun, and da-da-da, and you digest them, and you alter them, and all like that. They were in a hurry, and it had to be done just like that. So that's what happened. And then when it was being built, I thought, oh my God, what have we wrought? There was this brilliant yellow thing right in the middle of this small town. And what was even worse was that all of the depictions that we could make were endorsed by everybody, including the city council. And then when it was opening, as it was opening, I went to the theater owner, I said, I think it's a little too bright. Maybe we should kind of like, oh yes, he said, we'll do it later. Now we have to just keep on painting. We just have to keep on going. And so they did. And then a lot of people loved it. A lot of people do love it. Some of their other consultants love it. But some people didn't love it at all. And some of those people are on the city council. So now what's happening is they're building another theater on the next block, and they want us to keep coloring all the little buildings and everything. And this other theater is very small. But you cannot imagine the scrutiny that it is undergoing, and the politics, and then the way that people are emotionally involved, so that the presentation that we have to give them, we are now told has to be done in markers. Why markers? Well, that's what they want. And so we are forced into this stupid kind of rendering, which we don't even know how to do. We don't know anybody who does things like this in markers. But we have to somehow prove to them in their own language that they're going to like it.
But somehow I want to bring us out of the politics of the color into. I mean, there's this very peculiar kind of frustration that I'm aware. I mean, we're trying to talk about color, and color is this very this very ephemeral but very extraordinarily important part of our lives. And I somehow want to bring us into red, and I don't know exactly how to do that, but maybe I want to get some questions from some of the people in the audience about what are people. You had a question. Yeah.
To what Deborah was saying before about, you were saying like actually how colors were connected to certain times or eras or something, and where you also just saying red. You said like Renaissance, it was associated with this color, and I was just thinking there's something like, for example, about the 70s. The 70s was associated with very much with like yellow and orange and red and all these bright colors, and I was thinking, and I'm sure you probably know because you work with this, how does color and kind of zeitgeist go together? I mean,
color and what?
And zeitgeist, that, you say like the 80s have these colors, and the 70s they have these yellow and, oranges, and the 90s have more like the pastel-y, or I don't know. I mean, it changes, but it seems to be like worldwide that these kind of tastes change, and who changes them or what changes them?
Well, part of it's changed subconsciously by something that I don't like, and that's called color marketing. I don't like them at all. I've been
color mafia.
Yes.
There is a color mafia.
There is?
Yeah. Definitely. It's called the color marketing group, and the color marketing group predicts
trends and
and
colors.
all the manufacturers belong to this group. And the group there are things that are in the air. Well, the group decides that that's in the air. And so right now, lately, green is out and blue is in. So you find blue makeup, and New York Times, you can see pictures of beautiful models with blue makeup, and then there's blue clothes, and then there's more blue in cars, and that will go on for a while until they sell all the stuff that's blue, and then suddenly it's got to be purple. I mean, that's part of what the color marketing does, but I think the zeitgeist that and unfortunately, that is just a fact, and I guess it's international because manufacturing is now international. But there's another kind of zeitgeist that I think on another level emanates from within society and emanates from often younger and more aesthetic or more aesthetic and politicized reasons. For example, you know, fashion designers in the last decade began to look at the street and what people on the street are wearing, began to influence what's going on rather than what the rich are wearing or what the rich do.
Well, as an example, we have no more eye magazines because there is not a clientele to buy an eye magazines anymore.
Well, it's still Neiman Marcus.
Yes, but eye magazines was different than Neiman Marcus.
It was old money. Yeah.
And so that's gone. It's just like there's no more clientele for what's the one, Scandia, because they all died off.
Well, that's
the same thing with
happens to all of us.
So it goes into what you're saying.
Yeah, but I think that it's what I'm talking about.
You're talking about something slightly different, yeah.
It's black. I mean, you know, we love black now. I mean, I love it. I didn't always wear it. I didn't wear it as much as I wear it now. Let's say the last 10 years or something. There's something that simmers, that comes from all kinds of forces, and I think that's what Mary Gordon was writing about in the 70s. That what's going on in the world affects what colors we surround ourselves with.
So you think it has like psychological aspects?
So in a sense,
Well,
we
it
use
has more
color
than
as a tuning fork.
psychological. It has also, it has, it's also a commodity.
But I almost want to bring it away from the commodity.
No. It's not wrong in a commodity. Perfect example of this is commodity. Is most people don't. How many in this room really know where the color of blue jeans come from? Every one of them. Okay.
Where did
Blue
the color of
Blue jeans come from? And why?
Voile de Gêne.
But
It was a type of sailcloth that was called voile de Gêne and exported from Genoa in the early 19th century.
before that.
Before that?
Before that.
You've got an answer,
Yeah, I've got an
obviously.
answer.
What's the answer?
Okay, it goes back to the Portuguese trading with India. The word indigo comes from India. It's a plant. It was the first dye to reach the European continent that was a stable dye. Prior to that, and this even goes into food because it relates to the New World, was the first stable dye to come, and everything else was vegetable dye and faded away. When indigo came, it stuck. It was known as the blue tradition. And the blue tradition really started with Catherine Berganza when she married Charles II, because that was in her dowry, besides tea, cane, and there are two other things. And that brought new materials to the world. That's what I mean by commodity.
Okay.
And a commodity has an entirely different kind of content because it not only has a historicalness, this has an adventure, because this was also the beginning of the plant explorers, which the plant explorers affected the new Europe tremendously. It affected, I think it was Louis XIV, because he had a garden called the King's Garden, which was the largest botanical garden in the world, and he sent out people in expeditions. So things about color become commodities, and they become fascinating in many sorts of ways, and that's what I meant by that.
Okay, yeah, that was actually really valuable. Yeah, so a couple more questions back to Julie.
I'm just wondering why in Mexico there's so much more color at every economic level than here in the United States.
Well, Charles Moore used to say it was the paint salesman. They had certain paints and they sold them to
But the poor
everybody.
people in Mexico, no matter how poor they are, people that generally aren't.
No.
That's
Sorry.
my
Sorry. When you have paint, color, it means you have money. You can go to Mexico, you can go to the eastern part of the United States, and you can see some of the early Huguenot villages. You can see towns like Salem, Massachusetts, and you will see in the buildings, their first building, the first part of the building will be the first floor, which is where they kept the animals. That was painted with lime. The second floor was where they put the green. The third floor is where they slept, because that's where the heat rose. Now, the lime was used not only there, but in Europe. That kept the diseases down. When they got money, and the first room that they built next to what was the barn, usually was a tavern, and that was always painted a color, because that meant they were climbing up in the area of money. And you will find this not only there, but you'll find it throughout the New World. You'll find it in Mexico, you'll find it in Korea. It's not paint, it's wallpaper. They will wallpaper this wall with one paper and wallpaper another one and then wallpaper this one. That means that they have arrived and they have money.
But I don't think
it's money. I don't think it's money.
It is, Tina.
Well, it maybe wasn't with Huguenots, but if you go to there's some wonderful.
It's what?
The light.
It's light, but it's also they love color.
Yeah.
They're not afraid of color.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah, I
every
think that's
aspect
true.
of their life.
Yeah.
The
And
indigenous plants.
also, what?
The indigenous plants.
Well, that also
Yeah,
has a
that's
lot to
true.
do with it. What materials are available?
Right. But also,
Determine a lot about color. In other words, in certain parts of Mexico, there is, it's caracol, cinnabar. It comes from, it's purplish, it comes from snails. And the snails are used for the dye that makes the color, and the snails grow there. And it is appreciated, and there are different kinds of cinnabar and caracol. And I mean, if you go to New Mexico, there's a lot of adobe. Things are made out of adobe, and so it looks.
but I think
But there's always what's available. What was available? I've done a lot of study on this.
But the instinct, I think the instinct.
But the instinct is that after they've gotten out of this, they want color. They want color desperately.
I'm talking about people who were not even, whether they were poor and they're always poor, or whether they were rich and they're always rich. They still, in Mexico and in some countries, like more color than they do in others.
Well, there's
a very basic instinct, and it was explained to me in some of these wonderful fishing villages, where, like Burano is a perfect example, where there are amazing combinations of colors, one after another. And right across the canal in Venice, everything's very similar. It's very sort of Mediterranean, and there's Venetian red. But you go to Burano, and they have electric green, and they have pink, and that's because they were fishermen. They went out to sea, and when they were coming home, and it was a long, hard, stormy day, they wanted to send home.
Color.
And so they picked the
But
brightest.
it's the same thing as the
That's
white.
not money. That's sort of marking your territory.
Yeah, and it's also, there's a lot of emotional decisions as well, I think.
Well, that was also a logical decision.
But Christo was talking about light, and Christo comes from a Greek village, small Greek village, right? And there's what's the color?
I'm only nothing, but we have a house with my wife.
Right, and what's the color? And the color there.
In the east coast, it's across from Turkey, east side, Samos. The light is tremendous. It's amazing.
So inside, the villages inside, far away from the water, are ochre and a deep green. On the water, they're white and blue. They paint them like that. We're changing the colors on our house in the village, and I'm trying to kind of restore it in a way. We're the new people. We're on the main street, so everybody's watching. What color are we going to paint the front door and the windows? So they all give us their opinion. Brown is a safe color because it doesn't offend anybody. There, though.
Here we go again.
The colors have a relationship to political parties. So you can't, if you're blue, you're a Republican. If you're green, you're like a Democrat socialist. If you're red, you're going to kick out of this village, But so there's all this discussion also about color, but it also has to do with the light. The villages away from the water reflect, the buildings reflect the light differently. So it's maybe earthier and greener in nature. On the water, they're more brilliantly, colored, and the blue's different than inside. Local color,
But I think, like in places like Mexico, children grow up surrounded by color, and it's not threatening. I mean, it's not, somehow, here, it becomes a threat. If your house is too bright a color, it's kind of like...
Then you're from California.
Yes.
But there's also, that relates to this, Tina, and that is on the temples, going back to the monument, they all know that they were painted brilliant colors. So it's something that's almost like in the earth and in the genes. Those temples were not just beige and stone color. They were very, very vivid colors.
Well, the Greek temples were too.
Yeah,
I mean,
but that also
And the
relates
Egyptian
to the
temples
whole
as
bit
well.
of what I'm calling about, whether you like it or not, money. It's like the front door, the front facades, the entrances of the Gothic cathedrals were all painted brilliant colors.
But what did that have to do with money?
That's because you
was
could
expensive.
afford to have it made.
But it seems to me that it's not always about that, because if I think of the Mexican villages and I think of these people who have almost nothing, and yet they're making these very basic choices.
That's not only true in Mexico. I mean, it's true in parts of Asia.
That's true.
But it takes money for them to obtain that paint.
You know, also the technology has changed. What Gary's talking about is that in the early days, to mix these great colors, you had to go out and find the earth, the right stuff to put in it. Today, you can manufacture, you know, in bulk, every color, any color you want. And a good example of that is Oaxaca. If you went to Oaxaca in 1970, you go to there was some color, but not a whole lot. You go to Oaxaca today, it's a riot. Every color you can, because this paint is now available very inexpensively.
The same thing, Paul, that you're talking about is what happened in the area of Santa Fe. The early houses were all adobe and white, but until then what they call the general stores, which did not arrive until the 19th century, which there was a local hardware store. And that was the latter part, when the paint was able to be shipped across the country. It's about 1875, because that's when the catalogs came out for paint. And they were able to ship brown paint that they were not before across the country. Because I have catalog books of that. And that makes a difference about what I'm saying about the
Well, I mean, it's really fascinating in a way, because what I hear is that colors is, in a sense, that it's this very complex universe, which is a reflection of all of the pressures that are all of the elements of our civilization. I mean, I'm hearing you talking about money, hearing you talk about emotion, hearing you talk about trade, history. I mean, it's. I mean, I'm learning as you're talking here. I mean, it's very much a reflection of who we are at the moment, which I didn't realize quite so precisely as I am while you're talking about it.
Well, there's
all of these very emotional issues come up in it. Yes.
But it's not all emotional. I mean, it's like there's far more involved in doing color than anybody would ever realize unless they do it.
Well, but I'm thinking about color not only. That's true, Deborah. But I guess because I'm not in your position. I don't do color, so I'm thinking about color. I'm an artist. I use color. I'm just starting to use color now. I spent about the last 6 years almost using no color, because I wanted to strip color away to get to a new place, to get to ideas which were almost imperceptible ideas, and I wanted to pull them out without the color. Now I'm coming into color. But it's interesting to me that this conversation, the shape of the conversation in a sense, is much more variegated, much more influenced by many different.
It's a tremendous subject. It's a huge subject. It is not a little subject.
Well, I just have to say one thing. I'm an architect. And it seems like in whatever office I'm in, I'm the color person. And I'm being really very, very serious. I have that responsibility simply because I've taken it on, because I like it, and because it seemed kind of from early on that I was fairly good at it. So I do it, and I love it. And I look at your work, and I look at your work, and I look at your work. Thank you, ladies. And I'm being very, very serious when I say thank you, because, you know, sometimes I'm just sitting there with a building, and it has to be something. And, you know, it's not going to be pink and green again. Okay, so that was even a few years ago. But really, okay, two things I want to say. One, it's really hard to do it well. It's scary. How can we have a discussion about color in a school of architecture and not talk about how terrified architects are of color. I mean, they are terrified. My house is entirely white. Okay, I had to paint my living room ceiling last year. I had to paint it 3 times. It cost me so much money. I knew what color I wanted it to be, but you know, because I'm an architect and because it was my house, it had to be like the right color. It couldn't be like just any color of gray-green. It had to be like tobacco-y. And so I ended up, you know, Frazee backpack. Thank you, Frazee. It was gorgeous. But, I mean, it was like, people thought I was going to have a breakdown because I painted a color in my house. I'm not kidding. I mean, there are people in the office that wouldn't choose a color, and there are people in the office, if they did choose a color, I would immediately just snatch it out of their hands, send them out of the room and say, you can never choose a color for a building because they're so bad at it. You have to actually just tell them, you can't choose colors for this building because you're terrible at this. And everybody thinks, oh, you can just choose a color.
Yeah, just choose a color.
Yeah. Oh, just choose a color, but you can't just choose a color.
Just do it, you know, just do it.
Okay, so just
give me some colors.
At the very least, one has to have some degree of color encoding and decoding ability, psychologically.
Yeah, color eyes, you were calling it, right?
You call it the color eye, but the fact is that I and many other people can see a color, go away 10 years later, walk into a paint store, open a book and say, that color, and that'll be the exact color. You see? Yeah. So that's really good color encoding and decoding. You encode a color, and then long time later, you can decode the same color.
That's what we do all the time.
Well,
we walk down the street.
Okay. But what I'm saying is architects, in general, are entirely phobic. You know, buildings are not gray and white just because architects love gray and white. It's because they're terrified of making it any other color.
Well, they haven't been schooled. It hasn't been come along with the other things right along.
That's exactly right.
And it should be.
Huh? It's not really part of the culture.
It's really not.
In Mexico.
Do you think it's true for female architects as well as male architects?
I think that's a marvelous question. Do you think
it's true for female architects as well as male architects?
Well, I'm going to have to say, I said this to Eugenia on the phone yesterday, I'm just going to say it out there, I think women are better at color than men. I think it's because they're more sensitive to it, and for some reason, I think they actually encode and decode color more because it has more of a range of meaning to them. I don't know how, I don't know why.
A lot more color decisions in their life.
I honest to God, I don't know why, but I wouldn't go so far to say it's physiological, but it probably is. We probably just have more of those neurons that code and encode color.
But don't you think that's also culture? I mean, cultural is what
it could be cultural, but I swear, I think almost everything's biological.
Well, I guess
years ago, women's clothing had much more color.
Right, exactly.
Well, color blindness.
Well, there's also color blindness. That's right. There's 1 in every 5 men is colorblind.
I have a process question that relates to what you're talking about and something that Deborah hinted at. And just an aside, by the way, there are a lot of great male painters of colors. So I don't know how biological that is. That may be a cultural preference.
Or institutionalized, because look at the Army. Everything's gray in the Army, and the guys get used to seeing gray. So then they decide when they come out of the Army, okay, everything should be gray.
But I think that's for another reason, that in the Army, the individual is submerged in the group. And there are cultures in which that happens as well. The whole point of the Army is that you do not act by yourself in isolation. Now we have here someone who's been in an Army who is working in our office, and I don't know if you would agree with that, Niv, but it seems to me at least that in most of the armies I know, I don't know much about armies, but you know, it's like any institution also, like the church, in which you codify the MO by means of standardization of certain things, and color is one of the easiest things to do that with, because on the surface of everything.
Somebody's over here.
We've got somebody over here.
I just wanted to, I did have a question about
finish what you
process
can say over
that
here.
you raised and that you hinted at, which has to do with the color that you imagine or that you're choosing, and the color, the way it actually gets applied, and the process that each of the three of you go through in matching the two, which apparently is not always the same. In your case, the yellow building that you described didn't come out quite the way I understood you to say you either imagined it or had a sample of it.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember now whether you said this or I said it once, but years ago there was an article in the newspaper, and we were in it, and maybe it was you that said the most predictable thing about color is its unpredictability.
Nice.
Because it is, of all the materials available, the most mercurial, and the one in which the possibilities are infinite. You know, in stone there are only so many, in metal, natural metal, so many, and so on. In color, and now when you talk about the computer, you know, it's infinite. But so the difference is very, I mean, the difference from one decision to the next, they're so fine.
It depends what the color is going on. You can paint the same color on metal or the same color on
oh yes, and the same color on the same, the same color on the same wall. Yeah. We have a wall in the studio, which I painted one of those dissonant colors, this enormous wall. And you can look at that wall at certain times of day, and there are 8 colors. It's all the same paint. But then it's also exactly that. What are the colors of the buildings around it? What are the landscape? You know, it changes all day long, and it's the substrate, and it's how this. I mean, we're doing a project now in which we're working with colored concrete, and it's in Florida, and we spent a lot of time working with a man who is. He calls himself a concretist. He specializes in coating concrete. And I know you've had experience. But I mean, I was with him staining and everything like that, and we spent a lot of time together in 105-degree weather. It was raining and everything like that. Anyway, we worked out all these colors, and it's very, very large amount of stained concrete in sort of similar, closely orchestrated notes, analogous colors. And the formula, it was all that when he worked with the concrete with the concrete, the fabricator, and then together they worked out all these formulas, and it went back and forth and testing and on, and finally everything worked out just perfect, and they knew exactly the formula of the concrete. And so then they poured recently. In fact, it was today I heard that another pour went on in another part of the project, and for some reason. They're now in a hurry. It's opening up in a few weeks, and it didn't cure long enough. So they put the stain and the dot back on it, and it came out totally different. Totally, it was the same formula, the same everything, but it didn't cure long enough. So now, because the construction manager was in a hurry and started to cut corners, they had to go back and do it all over again.
You're lucky that you get it done over again. Most
well, this is a good client. This is one of care, you know, have the means care.
I think the scary thing about color is that it's very abstract. Knowing what a given color is going to actually look like at this much greater scale, at a different light, at different lights, at different times of the day, in a different city, in a different longitude, latitude, it's very abstract. And that's what's scary about it, I think. And so when I'm working with it, and it's still as scary. I don't know who said this. If it was Charles Eames, said when you're having trouble making, this always makes me feel better. If you're having trouble making a decision, it's because you don't have enough information.
That's very true.
That's true.
Yes.
It's true about everything, especially
in life.
In everything.
That's right.
Especially in life, especially in everything.
That's great. It sounds. It must have been Charles who said that.
It is very
exactly the truth. If you have enough information, you don't have any trouble making.
So you need a bigger sample.
So you need more information. There's a question back here.
No, I was going to say I'm a woman, and I very rarely think about color, and I don't think it's because I don't appreciate it. I think that, particularly, you were saying that architects are afraid of color. I think they just fall in love with the natural material, and like the color of concrete, the color of steel, the corten or whatever, aluminum. I really appreciate the natural quality of materials, and I have a problem with surface treatments like varnish or even a paint or anything. And I really appreciate the natural quality of the materials, and I think that's true with a lot of architects.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think that's a perfectly valid, viable way of looking at things. Now,
It's a luxury.
if you had to work with stucco, or, God forbid, drive it, what would you do?
Yeah. That's a luxury, to be able to.
Well, in a perfect world, I wouldn't use those materials.
But it is an imperfect
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
But I think any material...
And I'm not saying that's the only reason. It isn't. But what I am saying is I too love the natural color and material. I think this concrete is absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, if you look around this room, the color of the steel to the color of the wood to the color of that concrete to what's up here to this beam to the concrete floor. So it's very, very, there's a lot of color here.
And it's beautiful.
And there's nothing wrong, that's a very valid point of view. It's just that in the real world, you may be faced occasionally with problems that need to be solved that cannot be solved that way.
But
I
aren't
guess
people...
we would have a tendency to choose more natural colors, like
might.
a rusty red
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
rich gray.
But
I think almost every color is natural, quite frankly. I mean, there isn't,
Yeah.
I can't think of an unnatural color.
Yeah, they all do come out of the elements of the earth, and one of the things that the Navajo Indians have, they consider color sacred. So sacred that there are colors they will not let another human being, except people within their tribe, know where they go to get them in the inner part of the territory. I have a collection of Navajo Indian colors, and I'm not supposed to have them, but they were given to me by a museum director. And the reason is the color is sacred, and it's sacred because of where it came from. Within.
I think what she's talking about is more industrial than natural to the materials, because I think architecture is...
Oh, I know exactly what she's talking about.
No, what are you saying about it? Go a little further.
Well, I just think that like this building right here is a manifestation of like an industrial look, isn't it?
No, it's just all natural.
Well,
But natural
I mean,
to natural.
Expose
It's more honest.
beams like this with the rest.
Yeah, natural
Well,
man-made.
I mean, the plywood is just plywood and the concrete.
I don't think it's more honest. I think it's that you have to learn to work in a harmony with it. It's just a certain kind of harmony. It's not more honest, because then you're saying color isn't honest, and color is honest.
Can we keep it in one conversation here so everybody gets the...
I think what they're responding to is that they like the idea that the color expresses what the actual material is. That the concrete is naturally gray. That,
I mean, I think your work is beautiful. I love the color. But yeah, I like.
But it is true what we're saying, that when that's a luxury to be able to use color in that way, because like on a big building site, or for example, just in terms of maintenance, to maintain, well, not only in this climate, but in a lot of climates, that kind of wood door, you have to redo it every year. Most people won't do that. And certainly developers won't do that because nobody will pay for it. That's where the money comes.
That's one of the biggest...
Money makes decisions like that. And you can't use concrete because on a big commercial job it's poured all different times. And then there are guys, dropping the scaffold on it and there are big holes out of it. And they won't let you leave nice holes like that because somebody will trip with their high heels and sue them. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really comes into play that you have to actually deal with. It's hard, but we understand what you're saying about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm really fascinated by the different color periods, I think, in a sense. And it seems to me that technology and just plain old discovery of different materials has truly changed our color perception. I mean, people in the Renaissance never knew what a fluorescent color was. And it's hard to even imagine colors that we have not yet been able to produce or perceive. And I'm curious about how much, where you see color going. Your comment about Pershing Square, that it was 20 years old, the colors. how has that changed? Why? I mean, where do you see it going with this proliferation?
Well, I think
of
that's a very interesting thing that you bring up, which it goes beyond really what you're talking about, because you use the word. I think that there's a whole area, I'm going to put it in quotes, of technology, of what we haven't even tapped into, of what these processes are going to be able to produce for us, to produce color. And we have really, in one way, no idea. We can't predict. All we can be is ready for the adventure. Several years ago, we were doing work for a deposition plating company out in the valley, and it was giving them an image program. But the colors on deposition metals produced by deposition plating were so fascinating to me. But there was not a technical means yet to be able to get that in a mass. They could get it on small units this big, but to get it anything on a unit this big, they had not arrived at the technology to do that. So there's really a whole lot of things that are out there that I call Newtonisms. Newton was way ahead of his time, and the rest of the society and civilization had to catch up to him. And I think we're sort of in that now with technology. We don't know where it's going to take us or how it's going to manifest itself, but it is there, and we have to be sort of prepared to be able to, okay, let's go with that. Let's find out about that.
But isn't it like no matter where we are with technology, relating to what was said before, that people are basically not just architects, they're afraid of color, at least in our culture.
What we're trying to do is not make them afraid of color.
I think the computers changed that.
No, I think what we're trying to do is not to make them afraid of color.
But do you think it can overcome culture? I mean, as we said before, the Mexicans are not afraid. No. And do you think technology can make all of a sudden the people here become crazy?
No, I think it also is a gathering of forces, of people. The thing that I like, which is an old word, is collaboration. And that is, okay, so you don't know color. Why don't you call up somebody who does know color? If you don't know lighting, why don't you call up somebody? So then this becomes a collaboration. It's not a new idea. It's been around for a long time.
Ingrained. I mean, just looking around this room, everybody's wearing black and gray and beige, and except for a few examples, it seems very
Well, I think it's a very general question. It's too general. I mean, are you talking about the way people dress? I mean, look at any screen filled with color all over the world all day long. So where is it that, you need the cars are colored? So, I mean, it needs to be more specific. If you're talking about the way people dress, there is no question that in the last decade, black has been extremely fashionable. And even when the fashion press declares that black is over, white is in, it persists. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. And it's okay. And it may always be there. And now it has meant different things in different societies. In fact, one of our long-term associates talks about...
So they're going to have